the discussion regarding the Emery Go Round shuttle and the citywide property-based business improvement district. Karen will have a presentation, and then after that, we'll have time for public comment.
Okay. Get rid of this one. Uh-oh. There we go. Show. Great. Okay. So, City Council, tonight will be a really kind of an information item in most ways around the Emery Go Round shuttle. We are going to be asking for some direction regarding potential funding options in the future, but mostly this is an information item. I know that there's been a lot of community interest in this subject, and that the level of information is not been consistent. Some are new to this issue, some are very familiar with this issue. So a lot of what the goal is tonight is to give kind of everyone the same basis of information. So some of this is information that you may have heard from before. So basically the presentation, the overview, is to give some background on the Emery Go Round's history, including the origins of the Emery Go Round, the origins of the Transportation Management Association that now operates and administers the Emery Go Round, the property-based business improvement district, which is the primary funding mechanism of the Emery Go Round at this point, in governance regarding the Emery Go Round shuttle today. We'll also talk briefly about current Emeryville operations, the current budget, ridership demand issues, and what I know is near and dear to the hearts of many here tonight, the Powell Street shuttle stops, including the one near Watergate. And then there will be a brief overview of the fact that the main funding mechanism for the Emery Go Round is up for renewal in 2006. And there have been some issues raised around this renewal. 2016, sorry, 2016. And some of the funding options that the city might want to consider to either supplement or replace the current funding strategies. And then there's a few long-term issues that we will not go over in a lot of depth. You've seen them before. We won't be really asking for direction on this, but because it's going to be an introduction for some of the people here today to briefly talk a little bit about some of the long-term issues such as the bus yard and the EBOT study, which is the Emeryville West Oakland Transportation Transit Study. Okay.
It is hard to hear you, Karen.
Oh, okay. My name is Karen Hemphill, and I'm assistant to the city manager. And I am the city's liaison with the Emeryville Transportation Management Association that operates the Emery Go Round shuttle. And I actually was the staff person who helped establish the shuttle way back in 1994. So some background to the shuttle. The shuttle
Talk closer to the mic.
It's hard to hear you, Karen.
Okay, yes, I have to. Okay, come right up to the mic. That's what I always tell other people, right? It's what I tell everyone else. And yeah. Okay, so some background to the Emeryville shuttle. The shuttle was established in 1994 after some discussion amongst city staff and with some of the business community. There had been actually an attempt to start a shuttle a few years before that, but that didn't go off the ground. And the situation is that the city had quite a few independent private shuttles, such as the former Watergate Towers, which is now partially the Towers. I believe I think Wareham Development had a shuttle, and so did the then called the Martin Group, which is now not so much in the city anymore. And so there were several independent shuttles. And at this point, it was just at the beginning of Emeryville's economic development. And there was this understanding that there needed to be some type of alternative transportation for the city, that you really couldn't build your way in terms of enough streets or enough parking in order to transform Emeryville from being kind of an industrial town to more of a high-tech regional retail city. And so the city had started to request some mitigation from some projects. Of course, this was very early in Emeryville's development. There weren't that many projects that were mitigation was being asked of, but this was something that the city was beginning to do. And at the same time, this was around the time that EC Transit experienced what seems to be a cyclical wave of budget cuts due to a loss of revenue. They don't have their own independent strand of funding, such as BART. So this was kind of the background in which the Emery Go Round was started. The city believing that it was best to have one citywide shuttle rather than perhaps requiring a lot of small independent shuttles that would add to the independent shuttles that were already in the city. So there was an agreement by about 8 developers, major employers, and property owners with the city to fund the project for a 3-year pilot with the thought that if after the first year that there wasn't at least 40% more ridership than the independent shuttles that were already in existence, then the pilot would stop then. That was broken the first week of the shuttle. So ridership demand has always been an issue with this system. You build it and they will come. The first 3 years, at first, the private sector funding was less than 50% of the shuttle cost. And the city had an expectation that the shuttle would be 100% privately funded and that there would be a nonprofit Transportation Management Association established within 3 years in order to completely take over the operation and funding of the shuttle. So the first 3 years, it was a participation agreement specifying members' contributions, minimal service letters, routes and governance. The city administered it. I was the staff who actually worked on developing the contract for the vendor, and it was run and operated. I was administered and run by the city for the first 3 years. At the end of 3 years, the private sector funding had grown from 40% in the first year to 90% in year 3. So pretty successful in terms of what the goal was at the time. In 1997, the TMA, the Emeryville Transportation Management Association, was established as a nonprofit organization with the assistance of a grant from Caltrans and assumed the operations of the Emery Go Round shuttle. During this period, from about 97 to 2001, the TMA membership expanded to 17 financial contributors. It was a mixture of developer agreements and conditions of approval, as well as still some voluntary contributions. And I would say it was probably, still a lot of it was voluntary contributions. The TMA Board consisted of all the members, all 17 members, and was institutionalized among themselves through a membership participation agreement. There was minimal city financial contribution at this time, and that there was a city-appointed liaison to the board, which was myself, with no voting rights. And during this period, we began seeing a huge spike in ridership and capacity demand as the ridership demand continued to grow, partly because of new development and partly because it was there and it was very convenient and it was free to riders. So in 2001, by then, there was the city and the Transportation Management Association recognized that the increasing ridership demand had potentially outpaced the ability for the current funding strategy to cover the cost of operation. And so the TMA and the city reviewed funding options. And the business community became very interested in a property-based business improvement district, which is a assessment district that is formed under state law. And there's very specific steps on how it has to be. It's an assessment district for only commercial property owners. The business community petitions the city in order to establish this assessment district, which is a way of assessing fees on commercial property owners. And as part of that of that process, there's a management plan that is approved or really ratified by the property owners, which includes the assessment levy formula, as well as the types of services and projects that are going to be funded through this assessment district. Generally speaking, these kinds of districts are more kind of downtown merchant association kind of assessment districts where there's no security patrols, more lighting and banners. To my knowledge, this is the first one that was done to fund a citywide transportation project to a shuttle. So the assessment levy at first was about 17 cents a square foot for office and retail space, with commercial industrial owners paying half of that, or 8.5 cents per structural square feet. At this time, residential use properties and all properties in residentially zoned areas were exempted by law. The management plan that was ratified by the commercial property owners also exempted commercial properties that were more than 1,000 feet from the shuttle route. That's the route, not a stop. And the TMA board membership, once the improvement district was formed, was established as being the 7 top PBID assessed commercial property owners, as well as initially a Chamber of Commerce representative. That's changed slightly, which we'll get to in the next slide. Under a PBID, the activities and services that are funded by the PBID are set by those that are assessed through their what's called an owners association, which is again part of PBID law. And so the idea is that those that are assessed have the decision-making opportunity, are the primary decision makers in setting services, fees, budget. And as you'll see, that there is a relatively small role for the city. So for those developers that did have conditions of approval or developer agreements, the city agreed that for as long as the PBID was in place, that funding, contributing to the PBID satisfied their agreement obligations. There are still a few properties that contribute to the Emery Go Round outside of conditions of approval, or rather through conditions of approval that don't feed into the PBID, and those are some new housing complexes that the city has required, as well as there's some parcels in Oakland that are part of the joint powers agreement for the East Bay Shopping Center. So for example, Target is in Oakland, so they can't be assessed in an Emeryville assessment district, but they pay the same rate through their condition of approval. So to give you a sense of the current Emery Go Round organization, so there's the Emeryville Transportation Board of Directors. Under them, Gray Boeing Associates is a transportation services company, management consulting firm that on behalf of the Board of Directors manages and administers the Emery Go Round shuttle. And the shuttle itself is operated by MV Transportation, which is a new operator of this year. And the city gives general oversight. So to get a little bit more specific about how governance works now that it's a property-based business improvement district, is that, again, just to clarify that the Emery Go Round really isn't a city service. In fact, when you're establishing a PBID, part of what is in the engineer's report that sets out why the assessment district is coming into being is that it cannot be services that the city is already providing. It has to be an above and beyond what a city service would be. So getting back to that first that first example, the business district that wants additional security patrol or sidewalk steaming or more frequent street cleaning that the city offers. And so this was, again, a service that the city did not offer, which was the Emery Go Round shuttle. So the TMA is the owner's representative as outlined in PBID law. And the three major, I would say, where the authority rests are either in the PBID law itself, in the management plan that was ratified by the property owners that pay into the assessment and approved by the City Council, and in the TMA bylaws, which govern how they internally operate. For example, how the board is elected, those are all part of the internal bylaws of the TMA. That's not something that the city has any say over, though we can certainly give our opinion, or the opinion can certainly be made. The TMA Board also determines the shuttle service levels, routes, and stops, develops the annual budget, and makes recommendations on what the assessment levy should be every year based upon that budget. The city, under the law, the state law that brings PBIDs into being, gives the city really just general oversight responsibilities. It's kind of, we're making sure that that the assessment levy is warranted based upon the budget that they recommend. The city really has, though I said general, has really limited authority. PBID law states that the city shall contract with the TMA as the owner's representative for any of the services. It's not a may, it's not a will, it's a shall, which is pretty forceful under law for those of you with some legal language experience. And it also, while the city approves the overall annual TMA budget and the annual levy, the city only has the authority to approve a smaller levy, not a higher levy. And it also, if the money cannot be used for anything else other than the services that were in the management plan, and nor can the city end the PBID, only those that essentially voted into being the commercial property owners itself. So I said the city's authority in the PBID is very small. It's really just the council's authority is really just general oversight. So to give you a little sense of the current levy and operating budget, is to give you a sense that it's about $128 per, it's about 225.6 cents per square foot for office retail, half about that for an industrial or warehouse. With the new PBID that started in 2006, rental residential units are also assessed, and that's $127.70. The total estimated revenue for service year 14 coming up was a little over $2.7 million, which is actually a budget that is that the proposed expenditures are a little higher than the revenue that's coming in through the PBID revenue and the other sources, and that was what. And so if that money is not made up some other way, the TMA would revise their budget to meet their revenue. Oftentimes they have savings, so this is not that unusual. And then also in January, February of this year, the TMA plans to review the budget, one, to see if things need to be altered because of the deficit that you see there, or also there's been a call to really have a budget that looks at ridership demand, and maybe a budget that while it may not be sustainable through the current revenue, is the budget that the board might say is what is needed to meet ridership demand. So just to give you a little sense of the kind of how the money flows into, or who pays for the service, if you notice that almost 80% of who pays into the PBID are retail office parcels, there is relatively a small amount by industrial warehouse, a little bit over 10%, and very small that are assessed outside of the PBID. For example, if you look at the residential parcels that are through conditions of approval, it's a per unit per year basis of $127. So even a fairly large complex does not pay that much a year. So that is a overall fairly small part of the total amount that pays for the shuttle, and that the city contributes not even under $50,000, and this really represents that the city is paying as a property owner, and under PBID law, neither public agencies or nonprofits are exempted from the PBID, though in Emeryville, other than the city, there has not been payment by other public agencies, most notably the school district and the U.S. Post Office, with AC Transit not paying into the PBID, but they do they provide some in-kind services as the Emery Go Round is able to fuel up at their diesel pumps. I mean, they get charged for it, but it's still at a subsidized rate. So for the past few years, costs have exceeded revenues, primarily due to increases in fuel cost, maintenance costs. There's an aging fleet, and while the revenue generated by the PBID has more or less kept up with operational cost, there is the cost that every time that you expand ridership, you need more buses or rolling stock capital. And there is now, because of that, a need to add buses as well as drivers to meet ridership demand right now. For those of you who ride it regularly, even sometimes, the buses are fairly much at capacity at this point, particularly during key commute hours. And in fact, during the presentation in July, when the assessment district levy was being requested for the next year, the TMA also requested that the city provide some funds to meet the escalating operational costs and ridership demand. And the staff did not recommend that the city do that at this time, but City Council agreed to consider it as part of looking toward the future. Just to give you some sense of how the revenue and cost history, and this is a slide furnished by the TMA that was provided at a study session in May of this year. And you see kind of a jump up in this area, and that was when the PBID was renewed. And you can see that by 2012, expenditures are slightly over revenue, and the TMA either through operational savings where it can, is still able to cover those expenses, or in some years have dipped into their cash flow revenue reserve, which right now is at about $500,000, which for a service of this type is not a whole lot of money in terms of, particularly when the way the money flows from the county to the city and to the TMA. That's the money that they have for that cash flow. This is just an idea of where the buses go now and the different stops that there are. The TMA will be reviewing the shuttle stops and the routes and the service levels in early of 2014. One, to see if there's a way that they can squeeze out some efficiencies to be able to provide more service for the ridership capacity issues that they're experiencing. And also there have been some members of the TMA who would like the board to review how the routes and the stops maximize and provide equity for those that that are contributors to the system financially. So as all of you who know, that that as part of this discussion, something that's brought a lot of the community here, I'm sure, is that the stop near the Watergate condominiums was taken off route at the onset of the city's sidewalk construction project. And it has now been temporarily reinstated by the TMA in response to a city and community request. The TMA, as I mentioned before, will be doing an analysis of ridership demand, route stops, and schedules. I think they just started this actually, and they plan to have recommendations to the TMA board in early 2014. The PBID is scheduled to be renewed in the next few years. It sunsets in fiscal year 2015-2016, which would be the last year of funded service would be 2016 unless the PBID is renewed and or an alternative or supplemental funding is found. The PBID requires a Prop 218 process in which those that are assessed get a chance to approve the management plan and the assessment formula that will be used during the lifetime of the next PBID, which would be that would then be from 2016 to 2026. And a PBID can only be levied on parcels that have a special benefit from the service being funded through the assessment. And supplemental funding may be needed for either general community benefit or for benefit that would be deemed to be above and beyond the benefit derived from the contributions of those assessed. So staff recommends that that the city would work with the TMA to consider going through a renewal process for the PBID in 2015 to give ample time before the sunsetting of the service in 15-16. So in addition, there are some funding options that have been thought about, either short time because of the ridership capacity issues that the service is now experiencing, as well as long-term concerns around just the ability for the current model to either adequately fund all the ridership demand that may come in the next 10 years, or the need to look at some of the limitations of that type of funding mechanism. So some of the things that were that staff has considered, and this is not an exhaustive list, there could be some others, and I divided these into kind of two types of funding options, one that would just require city council approval, and those that would require either a Prop 218, which is those that are being assessed, or voter approval. So for the city, one would be, of course, transportation grants. I think particularly for some of the capital needs of the Emery Go Round. There are shuttle services in the area that have gotten funding, particularly for rolling stock for buses from the Air District or from other funding sources. There's also the possibility for the city to contract through using general funds for supplemental service. This is something that actually the city does for the 8-to-go service, which is a special paratransit service that's a dial-a-ride service that you can reserve. And it could be possible for the city to contract other supplemental service that would provide service distinct from that which is being provided through the PBID itself. There's also the possibility of the city council deciding to just put general fund money for general operations. This is kind of just general kind of ridership capacity, meaning that. Capital for buses, and also, as we'll see very briefly later, the TMA is also looking for a long-term or permanent bus yard, and they don't have the ability to do that on their own. As I said, they only have about $500,000 of cash reserve, and really that is, I would call, operating cash flow, as opposed to a reserve that there's a lot of room for. Particularly, they do have the lease. They do, of course, lease their current space, but if there was need for site improvements or that type of thing, they don't have the money for that at this point. The city could also, so voter approved, or Prop 218 is PBID renewal, and that process would include a new management plan and an engineer's report that would look at this issue of special versus general benefit that had been raised by some members of the TMA, and that would be the document that would be voted upon or ratified by the property owners before it would go to the council for approval. There's also the possibility of a voter-approved city parcel tax and a voter-approved sales tax. So it would be helpful, perhaps at the end of this presentation and after, I'm sure the community will have some things to say, is that this, as I said, is mostly an information study report. But if there's any of these funding options that are either ruled out, or if the council might be particularly interested in staff pursuing, we can come back with some additional information. So, for example, if there was interest in general funds for general operations, at this point there's not a specific proposal other than what the request was from the TMA in July. So we could do more around that. If there was interest in the PBID renewal or some of these other voter-approved taxes, then staff could do some, more work to get some specific information about what that might look like and what a timeline would be for any of those. and if there's interested in supplemental service. So that would be helpful, so staff can prioritize those funding options that the City Council is most interested in. If there is anything that requires voter approval, it has to be put in front of a ballot at the same time that there is a member of that there's a council seat up for election. So that would have to happen in 2014. I suppose it could happen in 2016, but that would be cutting it a little thin. And then staff would suggest that if the PBID renewal is followed through, which I not heard that would not be a process to go through, that happened in 2015. So there's kind of an opportunity, depending on how a PBID renewal and or any other kinds of funding mechanisms that might require some voter votes, that there's a couple of years to be able to do that, as opposed to just kind of, doing it all at the last minute with no options. Just very briefly, a couple of the other issues facing the Emery Go Round is the need for a long-term bus yard. The current bus yard lease agreement has been extended through 2018, so that's good news. However, there is a 6-month termination clause, so even though it's extended through 2018, if the current bus yard, if the owner of the current bus yard had a alternative use for that site, there's just a 6-month termination clause. Some of the concerns around a long-term bus roads are operational constraints. If you had, for example, a bus yard in Richmond, that would substantially increase cost. And of course, the funding constraints of there being somewhat limited resources other than the lease revenue that the TMA holds that are just based upon the TMA and funded through the current PBID. So the last time we spoke about the bus yard, these were the options that council was most interested in. One would be maintaining the current bus yard site on 67th Street behind the old Merchant building on the Berkeley-Emeryville border. One is the I-580 underpass by Mandela Parkway, which is situated in Oakland, and there's not been a lot of support for Oakland to date for that particular site, but I understand we have a new city manager who has some maybe some connections in Oakland. So we'll see. Yes, and then there's the I-580 underpass off of San Pablo Avenue, and a potential alternative site, but again, given the restraints, operational constraints, there's not a whole lot of sites that would work. Lacoste Avenue had been an option, but City Council at the time had kind of ruled that out. And lastly, there is a long-range strategy for alternative transportation in the East Bay corridor. And the Emeryville West Berkeley West Oakland Regional Alternative Transportation Project, or EBOT for short, is a study that's being funded through MTC and led by Emeryville, includes of course Berkeley and Oakland as well. And the whole issue of connecting the communities, essentially I would call the communities west of San Pablo together. This has not historically been an area that's been well served by transit, given its industrial roots. There really didn't have the density for the routes that there were in other parts. But of course, that the use of this western area is changing. It's now much more high tech, regional retail, and many, many, many more residents than existed there previously. And so there has been interest in looking at what the needs are. And if you look at kind of where the EBOT, the idea is where the connectivity needs to happen, it does follow closely a lot of where the Emery Go Round already serves, and the TMA also administers the West Berkeley shuttle that goes to the that services some of West Berkeley and goes to the Ashby shuttle through a separate contract. So just to get back to really the only thing that staff would respectfully ask some direction on, or if there is some narrowing of these options or any other options that council has, that we can, do a little bit more fleshing out of what these alternatives would be, what timelines would be, and come back to you in probably the first quarter of 2014, with the understanding that anything that would require, if the council is interested in anything that might require vote of approval, staff would recommend doing that in November 2014. And so the first quarter would really have to be the time that the council starts thinking about anything that would need to be put on the ballot. If it's something that's a Prop 218 ratification, such as the PBID renewal, that does not have to be done at a November election, even your November election. It can be done by mail. So there's a little bit more flexibility when that could occur. So that ends my report.
Okay, thank you. Okay, do we want to hear from the public first and receive comments? Okay. Yeah.
I'll answer questions
Karen,
from
may
my
I?
seat.
Okay.
May I?
Yes. Yeah.
Good evening. My name's Trudy Presser. I'm the Executive Director for the Emeryville TMA, and I would like to make some brief remarks, and thank you, Karen, for the background on the association and the Emery Go Round. My remarks tonight are emphasizing the importance of, one, the success of the Emery Go Round and the need to keep this important, vital transportation system going, given what you've been hearing about, which is our near and long-term funding challenges. That we're facing. The Emery Go Round has been a great success story, and I think all of us know that. As Karen pointed out with the map, our routes cover the length of the city. We operate every weekday from early morning to late at night, and on the weekends we run the Shal-Pal route, known as the shopper route, keeping folks heading around the city even on the weekends and holidays to support the local businesses. We serve the majority of the commuter traffic to and from Emeryville, which significantly helps reduce traffic congestion in the city. Our recent boarding counts indicate that we are carrying approximately 1.6 million riders a year. I think Karen mentioned that. That's approximately 5,600 boardings on an average weekday. That roadway system could not handle this traffic if these buses are shut down. We run a very efficient system. Our 2013 operating budget is $2.7 million. If we divide that by 1.6 million riders a year, that's $1.70 per passenger boarding. We accomplished that this year with an extremely aging fleet. Our 2014 preliminary budget that was before you this summer is $2.9 million. If you take that and divide it with just the current estimated ridership of 1.6 million, that's $1.80 per passenger boarding. Our under $2 cost per passenger boarding is way under the average of other Bay Area bus agencies. In fact, in almost all cases, it's less than half. Several agencies are more than 3 times our cost, and we do this as a free ride. The size of Emeryville and the proximity to BART and the Amtrak stations makes this an ideal location for this efficient last-mile service. Our success is the envy of many other cities. In my brief term so far as executive director, I know this by the amount of calls we get about the Emery Go Round. Just a few weeks ago, I know many of you know this, we were even featured on NPR.
Yes.
Which was pretty cool.
Nice story.
The story illustrated the city of Emeryville pioneered local businesses coming together with local government to support the system.
Trudy, that's 3 minutes. We need to hear from the public as well.
Okay. Well, with that, I'll turn it over to our chair. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Jeff Sears,
current president of the TMA. I've been on the board for over 50.
We're going to hear from the public.
I'm part of the public.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Not in this country.
Well,
He's allowed to have 3 minutes. Let's go ahead and proceed,
if I can use
please.
my 3 minutes,
Thank you.
please.
Go ahead.
So I've been a volunteer on the board for over 15 years. I was president back in 2001 when the PBID first started. My company is the single largest contributor to the system. This year, we've paid in more than $338,000. Now, we could run an excellent private shuttle like Google or someone else with less money than that serves our campus. But we don't, because we believe in the Emery Go Round and its benefits. It's been a success story and it's been working, but it's been under attack the last year. And I hope that you will all listen to this, because it's attacking something that I'm sure you value highly. All those buttons tell me you value it highly. But the way we're funded, the PBID, does have lots of arcane but important laws that we, the board, take very seriously as fiduciaries, because the board wants the system to continue. And what it means is that we have to provide a special benefit to the people who contribute. And if we provide a general benefit, and those are weird, vague legal terms, but it means you're supposed to serve predominantly people who pay. And where that matters is this. In the last year, we've been threatened aggressively with legal action, people saying you're providing too big of a general benefit, and we're going to sue you and cause the PBID to go away, or at least we're going to cause it not to be renewed. So basically, we're going to take your funding system away, and we take that very seriously. So there's a problem, because the system does serve a lot of people who don't pay. Probably many of you don't pay and you enjoy it. I'm not saying that's bad, but it is a legal problem, okay? It's a legal problem, and it threatens the PBID, and the majority of the board agree with what we've heard your staff recommend, which is the PBID is the best, most logical system to continue into the future. It's worked for a long time, but the people who are unhappy and threatening legal action are concerned about the equity, that they're paying a lot of money for a service that provides a lot of service to people for free. Now, I've heard some of the people that have those complaints say they believe in the Emery Go Round, and if the equity could be improved, and I don't know exactly how to define that tonight for you, but improved, meaning more people who are writing that aren't paying pay in. And again, I don't know the details, but that they will continue to support the idea of a PBID. I've heard that. So that's encouraging to me, but we need to work on the equity problem. And what we hope is that the council will give staff direction to do that so that we could renew the PBID. It's a very reliable, stable funding system, and it doesn't dip into other coffers that just aren't flush. You're going to make lots of choices about where to spend money. We don't think you need to deplete sources when there is a source today that works.
Thanks, Jeff.
I guess you can hear me. The mic seems kind of far away. But there's $2 million that pays for the PID, I believe. And it comes from retail, office, and mixed spaces. And it should be $4 million, because they're the ones that get the benefit. We are going and we're shopping at those retail places like TJ's, Bevmo, Ross, Maxwell's. And I say that if our bus service is stopped, we boycott those places, because they have the power. They already give $2 million a year to keep that going. Well, they got to keep it going to the Emeryville original stops, and I propose that if we should get a stop at the what do you call it? The Emeryville Marina. Wouldn't that be great if they could have a bus service? And what about getting a bus stop out to the end of the park? And the whole thing about this city turnaround, who designed the sidewalks so that we couldn't have a bus turnaround? somebody should be counted to that, should be held to the fire for that. And I just wanted to say one thing about the police officer. I'm a radical, obviously. And it's good we're giving $10,000 to catch the enemy of the working class, the lumpen proletariat, which is the criminal class. But there was a man that was killed by the Oakland police, Alan Bluford, in May 2012, and he died from lack of blood. And there's a committee called Save Alan Bluford, or Freedom Justice for Alan Bluford, sorry. And there was another man that was killed, I forget his name, but the Oakland police had to pay out $950,000, almost $1 million, due to the heroic lawyer, John Burrett. So I don't know how many people I'm talking to that know about this stuff, but there's a war going on. The 1% are attacking us every single day, every single hour, every single minute. And this is just another attack. And so I say, boycott those businesses, let those businesses know. If our stop is stopped, we stop the businesses. They got lots of money. The 1% are more richer than they ever been in the history of the world. So dare to struggle, dare to win. What kind of pie? Occupy,
Thank you.
strike, unite, support the bar workers, support the bulb,
Your time's
the
up, sir.
Albany bulb. People, you know where the Albany bulb is, right by
Time's
the
up.
racetrack? They're being evicted. They're being put into buildings that have 15 people each.
Sir, if you believe in other people
15
being
people
able
each.
to speak,
15 people.
the rest of the community would like to speak.
Your time's up. Hey, your time's up.
curfew is 8 p.m.
Your time is up.
and 15 women, and there's 60 homeless people out in Albany bulb. Please sit down.
Okay. Also, when you come up, if you could introduce yourself, I myself like to take your name down and take notes, just so I remember you. It's
Understood.
nothing
Thank you.
targeted.
My name is
And then,
Julie.
just one quick second, another announcement, that if you would be willing to sign in
Sure.
also with your
Sure.
name. Okay, thanks.
My name is Julie, and I'm actually here on behalf of my third grade daughter, Paisley, who is learning about civic responsibility. We saw the letters posted. We are Watergate residents, and we saw the letters posted, and she was actually outraged. We were inconvenienced greatly by the lack of the Emery Go Round coming to those two stops while the streets were being refurbished. And I also am very clear that we serve that bus route in particular services a lot of elderly people who were also inconvenienced with just the simple things of shopping. So that's an issue. That particular corridor services 1/10 of the entire population of Emeryville. So that is another consideration. However, Emery Go Round is not just servicing residents. It's also bringing in people from outside of Emeryville who are taking advantage of the system. But it sounds like the residents are being requested to actually absorb this cost. So that is an issue. So I understand that there are issues that need to be considered, financial considerations, but perhaps non-residents, maybe that's another alternative. Non-residents could absorb some of the costs and not the residents. Because we already provide and help, bolster the local businesses. So I don't want to take up too much time. It's past bedtime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Sue Kelly, and I live at 4 Admiral Drive, number 423 in Watergate. And I have 3 points for my 3 minutes. And first of all, I want to thank all those people who had the foresight to start this Emery Go Round and give it a really cute name, Emery Go Round. Everybody else's transit systems are called transit this and that and everything. Anyway, and I just want to say I believe Emeryville, and we found out tonight, has all the hallmarks of cityhood. We are a metropolitan, very tiny metropolitan area. We have businesses, we have skyscrapers, one-story cottages, we have artists and theaters and shops and stores and companies and gourmet restaurants and takeouts and transportation hubs for the city of San Francisco and marinas from all over the world. And we have intersecting highways from north, south, east, and west. And the hallmark of a city is to have a public transportation system. And I think that's what we really need, and I'll let all those people who know how to fund these kind of things, I'll let them do that. Let's see. I lost something here. Okay. We also have a city government, all of you people who are working for Emeryville. And in this day and age, that is an accomplishment, because that's what means most to all of you who are here. In other metropolitan areas, there are city incorporations known as boroughs and avenues, or more mundanely, suburbs. And there is an area in Emeryville, it's just the same sort of area. It's on the other side of the freeway, and it's an extension called Powell Street, generally referred to as the Watergate area. So we're kind of a suburb, and we do need transportation out there just as much as you need it in the rest of the city. And I don't want to tell you that if there was a borough called the Bronx, and if there was no public transportation in the Bronx, or there was no transportation out to the avenues, it wouldn't be a pretty sight. So I think we should keep our Admiral. We'd like to have one at Admiral. We thought we were going to have one. But not only did we not have a No Admiral bus stop, we didn't even have a bus. So anyway, I just think, personally, I believe that everybody should share in paying for public transportation. I don't think the business people should be responsible for all that. I mean, that's my own personal take on this. And I hope you'll keep, what we're asking the city council tonight is to do everything that they can to keep those stops at Captain and the police station and in the western suburbs out there.
Thanks, Ms. Kelly.
And my main job is to show you all these petitions that everybody signed.
If you could hand those to the city clerk,
There's
please.
close to 500.
Thank you.
Right, very good. Okay, my name is Ron Freund. I also live on the west end of the city at Watergate. And as you probably all know, all is not quiet on the Western Front. The problem with the TMA wasn't maybe so much that they didn't have the legal right to do it. The question was it the right thing to do in the way you did it? That was the problem. From our point of view, it was done in a very arbitrary and secretive manner. I'm sure the meeting was open, but we were not advised about it, nor did we expect to see such an abrupt end to our service. So given all of your PR specialties at Pixar and IKEA, et cetera, you might want to review how you handle that process. I want to posit that we should proceed on 3 assumptions. The first is that the Emery Go Round service be permanently restored to the Watergate stops. The genie is out of the bottle. The send button has been clicked. The fat lady has sung. I think you get my drift. It's too late to make that kind of change. So the issue is how to fund this deficit that the TMA has been talking about. I believe it should come from the business community. I think we should be seen as analogous to the television commercial industry in the sense that TV ads bring eyeballs to the companies. The Emeryville bus service, or the Go Round, brings customers to the businesses. So we are, in a sense, the eyeballs, and the EGR is the means by which we are brought to the businesses. So given that framing, what are the options? Karen invited alternatives to some of these proposals up here. I actually read your report, Karen, and I didn't see any typos. One thing I didn't see is any effort to look at the cost structure. There are two big ticket items, and maybe I don't understand why they're so large in the budget other than the maintenance and the fuel, et cetera. One is the office space or the occupancy line item, $115,000. It seems, I don't know, maybe some of the businesses could consider an in-kind donation. I believe the city does something with the Chamber of Commerce to reduce their cost. The second is the professional services contract, $300,000. Maybe they could have more competitive bidding. I don't know. Maybe they've already done that. But at least look at the cost side of it, not just the revenue side, as we hear in Congress these days. Look at changing the assessment structure. From what I read, there are more alternatives to a BID, oh man, than a property bid. There's a B bid and a T bid, meaning you can assess on revenues or on businesses or on tourism.
Okay, thanks,
Okay.
Ron. Thank you.
So I hope you'll address those issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi there. My name is this working? Can you hear me? My name is Jennifer Fair. I live in the Watergate condos as well. And I think the Emery Go Round should be expanded if any changes are made to the service. However, removing the Emery Go Round service from the Watergate would be an irresponsible and unsafe decision for the residents and the city as a whole. The Emery Go Round is one of Emeryville's great features, and one that helped convince my husband and I to move here when we were moving to the Bay Area from Michigan 4 years ago. We could have settled anywhere, and we fell in love with this little city. Emeryville has great things to offer, and the Emery Go Round makes those things more accessible. The Emery Go Round is a great way for businesses to tell Emeryville residents that they appreciate us and they want us to patronize their businesses. Asking disabled and elderly Watergate residents to go to the Watergate Towers to catch the bus is unsafe after dark and in rainy weather for those of us who are able to go that distance at all. But it's also completely out of reach for others. Removing these stops would tell me that you don't value us as Emeryville residents. Yes, there are some alternatives for those of us with special needs, but those alternatives are less convenient and segregate us from the rest of Emeryville's more able-bodied population. You cannot underestimate the value of normalcy and inclusion when it comes to making municipal decisions that affect the everyday lives of elderly and disabled residents. Residents do pay for this system. They pay indirectly by patronizing the businesses who pay. I do drive more than I ride the Emery Go Round, but I stick close to Emeryville when I'm spending money. The fact is that local businesses sponsor the Emery Go Round means that those businesses appreciate us locals who want to spend our money with them. Even though I'm not using the Emery Go Round every day, its existence certainly factors into my decisions when I'm deciding where to shop. If either or both of the Watergate stops are removed, that tells me that Emeryville's businesses don't value me as a potential customer, and I'll just keep right on driving to Berkeley, Oakland, Albany, El Cerrito, or beyond. And the parking's gonna be better anyway. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, Susan Hinchman, 3 Commodore Drive, long-term Watergate resident. This was a really painful evening. So many people have already left. I didn't want to leave so that I could speak on behalf of those who weren't able to stay because it was the right thing to do. The reason that I wanted to come here tonight when I saw the signs posted on my door is so I could share with you what a burden it's going to be for me to have to walk all the way to the towers. My hair is going to blow around, my feet are going to hurt with my high heels on, and I was looking forward to sharing that pain with you tonight. But yesterday when I was waiting for the Emery Go Round at BART, I looked over to my left and I saw a woman with a walker. And I actually realized that this wasn't about me. I actually took her picture and I brought it tonight and I intended to show it, but I wanted to respect her privacy because that was the right thing to do. So I listened to your presentations, and there's a lot of jargon that I don't understand and fancy legal and government decisions that I just don't have the capability to mull through. But I expect that you guys do know how to do that. And I expect that you will, and that you'll keep the Watergate service for all of us, because it's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Presentation? Please. Sure. Oops. Ah. What happened? Sorry. Just start talking. My name is Rob Arias. I'm a 10-year Emeryville resident. I'm also on the Park Avenue District Advisory Committee. And yeah, the PDF right there. That's the one. Yes. Thank you. I'm also the founder, editor of the Evil Eye News blog. I wanted to share some results of a poll that is ongoing on the blog. If you want to take it yourself, you're more than welcome to. There is a poll on this blog that I'll show you that I want to share the results for. I'll get to that. Next page. So as you know, currently, the route of Emery Go Round takes you to MacArthur BART. From there, 3 BART stations away, MacArthur, 19th, and then 12th, and then all the way to West Oakland, where from there, you get under the tunnel and you go to San Francisco. It's kind of a roundabout way for people that are trying to get into San Francisco right now, as opposed to the direct route, linear route, in fact, of taking Mandela Parkway directly south to get to West Oakland. Well, you'll be in the city, Embarcadero Station, probably within 7 minutes. Of the poll participants that took this poll, 243 as it stands, 72% of them were residents. And then the first question I asked them, well, where are they going? Turns out 78% of the ridership of the people that took this poll are going to San Francisco. So the bottom line is people that are going into San Francisco can save up to 25 to 30 minutes round trip, maybe more. So I'm just trying to tell you who your consumer is. Your consumer is going to San Francisco, and it would make sense to listen to consumers. This is not my idea. In fact, I heard it from our newly elected Mayor Asher when she was campaigning. So I don't know if I'm going to hold your feet to the fire as a campaign promise. There you go. A lot of people thought about this independently, but this is what people want. And it's just my responsibility as a citizen journalist to tell you what people want. And I figure you're the problem solvers to try to figure it out. Just going through the poll real quick. What if Emery Go Round service was offered to West Oakland service? You would see an increase in ridership. And for a city that, as you may have seen, is second in childhood asthma, I think it's something that we should pursue. Second in the state, in fact, in childhood asthma. So if everyone wants to be family friendly, what parent is going to want to move their children to Emeryville when we're second in the state in childhood asthma? So this is something we need to tackle. And what about SF commuters and visitors? People that are going to San Francisco, 79% of them would drive less and take Emery Go Round more. So the problems are solved, in my opinion. Just got to figure out the right way to do it.
Thanks,
Thank
Rob.
you.
Yeah, I'm not sure which one it is. Sorry.
That's no problem. My name is Andy Getz, and I'm here to advocate what I think is the only long-term stable financing mechanism for the Emery Go Round going forward. Although I'm associated with the Emeryville Property Association, which is going to be preparing a ballot initiative for a sales tax funding mechanism for the Emery Go Round, I think it's neither as equitable or as long-term stable as a assessment district. I noticed that there's a slight difference between the 9 options that you're being asked to consider in the staff report and the 9 options that were on the slide that was up there, which is that the one called Property Owner Ratified Assessment District in the staff report is characterized as a renewal of the P-bid in the slide. And I think there's a great distinction, because I think there are significant restrictions to the P-bid form that are not restrictions in other forms of assessment districts. And I'm here to advocate some form of property owner assessment district which will provide long-term stable financing that is fair to all the businesses and residents of Emeryville, and I think we can do it. And my personal instinct is that it will be organized under the 1915 Act, but I don't know. I think that with a smart, experienced assessment engineer and a committed council and citizenry, I'm prepared to put a lot of work and time into getting long-term financing, helping whoever else volunteers to get long-term financing through an assessment district for the Emery Go Round going forward for many years to come. Good luck.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ken Bukowski. I'm with the Emeryville Property Owners Association. And yes, we have been following the Emery Go Round. Since I've not been on the council, I have recorded all the meetings, posted all the agendas, and made a lot of information public. We are proposing a ballot measure which would be a half-cent sales tax to fund the service. One, because we don't think people are going to agree on the fairness of assessments. Two, if you don't want to see residents assessed, so this is the only way to have people from outside the community pay for it. You know, a half cent is only like 50 cents on $100. It's not a lot. And it's a way that everybody would be contributing. We could make this a city department. This has grown from a private service. It is a public bus service, and that's the way it should be treated. And as such, you wouldn't be able to just discontinue service and say, well, these people don't pay, let's not serve them. I mean, I didn't agree with that. I think that was wrong. And we never threatened to sue over the placement of the Watergate stops. We threatened to sue because the whole thing is wrong, trying to make it right. And that's what we want to do. I think a half-cent sales tax makes a lot of sense. City Council could create a board to replace the TMA. The assets of the TMA could become the assets of the city, and then residents would have some say in the operation instead of the way it is right now. You know, the board they have has got the 7 top largest contributors, so they're locked in, and all the other small people in Emeryville, business and property owners, they're paying, and they have almost no say in the board. And that's not right. This is a public service, and we need to graduate to that point, and I think we should fund it with a half-cent sales tax, rather than give it to the county. The county's going to be asking you for another half-cent, and what are you getting? More AC transit service? Well, they don't even serve Watergate, so we're getting a share from the county. I think rather than support the county measure, we should support the local measure, and that would give you enough money to buy new buses, improve service, and add service to West Oakland. So we'll be circulating that in the next few months, and hopefully you'll agree and let it go forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Carol Chapman. I live at Watergate Complex, and I ride the Emery Go Round at least 25 times a month, sometimes 30 or more. And so at that rate, at $1.80 per ride, I will have at least $450 a year under consideration. I will be paying attention to how this budget issue gets resolved, because I regard that as a significant amount of money. The reason, though, that I'm here is because I believe Murphy has a law of unintended consequences, and the city dug up the streets along there and created this funny sidewalk system along the road there. And now that they have it in place, it is impossible for the Emery Go Round to turn around at the stop that it has. It has to go all the way down to the end of the bay and make its turnaround there. For those of us who ride that adds 3 to 4 minutes to our commute, but it makes the drivers nuts because they have to go all the way out there and then come all the way back before they can let us off. The the city, Emeryville City, needs to fix this. You know, they created something. They didn't intend to do it that way, but it is a problem, and the bus can't run that way. So please fix it. Thanks.
Joyce Jacobson, 4 Admiral Drive at Watergate. New mayor, former mayor, city council members, TMA board members, and staff. I'm enjoying riding Emery Go Round like never before. We know tonight that Emery Go Round has been providing service to the city of Emeryville for almost 20 years now. And it has become an integral part of our community. Many people who live here depend on it. For Watergate, it's a lifeline. So we are dealing with something that I'm not hearing much discussion about at all, which I call public policy. We have the PBID representing businesses and their needs and responsibilities, but like squatters' rights, because this service has been provided to our community, has become part of our community, we are also dealing with public policy. And under public policy, the public has some rights and they also have some responsibilities. So I would like to request that a committee be formed to look at the bigger issues that are involved here, that this committee have community and rider representatives on it. And from here on in, when decisions are made, that there be some input from the community, because this is our bus service. And without it, you'll have to provide us with something else. And I specifically would like to ask that at least one voice be someone representing seniors and disabled, because that's a group that the service is essential for that group. Okay, that's one item. The other item is gray bone. I haven't known much about gray bone until I attended that meeting in October. And I've done a lot of thinking about the whole situation since that time. The current gray bone management is not in tune with this community. They don't seem to understand the community very well. I think they would not have recommended to the TMA board that our service be chopped if they had understood this community. If they had been in tune with this community, they would not have considered that. There was not 1 ounce of conversation during the meeting they took that vote where community was mentioned in any terms except the terms that Mr. Sears used tonight, which is non-payers.
Thank you,
Well, we're more than non-payers. So I want a hard look taken at gray bone.
Hi, my name is Finley Robbins. I live on Commodore Drive at Watergate. And kind of to continue what Joyce just said about non-payment, I feel that most of the riders from Watergate do leave money throughout the community, spending money at businesses, and these businesses are supporting the PBID, but in essence, we're helping to support that. And I would like to see that service continues at the Watergate stops. It's not enough just to have them at the towers. There are a lot of people that cannot walk that distance. And again, as riders, they are leaving money throughout the community. And something maybe in my naivety on that list of where money was perhaps going to come from an increase in tax or parcel tax, what about considering charging the riders? I heard 1 million riders a year. That's a lot of money that would be generated if riders paid something towards that. The peninsula has no other means of transportation, and if it was AC Transit, we would be paying a fare. So that's one thought that I had about including that in the discussion about where money would come from to support this. But I hope that the temporary measures restoring those stops, a solution can be arrived at that will include those stops there for the course of always having the Emery Go Round. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Louise Engel, a resident about 25 years at Watergate, and I've also spoken before the City Council on occasion on other city issues. So I've been active. I pay attention to what's going on here. I think I want to lay out an emotional comment. I think I really did not like the heavy-handed way in which the buses, the stops were just summarily ended without notice. That I was just really totally astounded by. So I hope in the future that does not happen again and that you take to heart the remarks made by other people here. Getting back to the issue, it seems right away when I began to investigate the structure of the business district and such, I was wondering why am I standing here before this board or this council when the speaker earlier kept emphasizing repeatedly that it's the district that makes all the decisions. Or that is association. They have the authority, they raise the funds, they make the decisions. Why are we here before you? Why are their representatives not here before us? Now, I understand that there is a bigger issue that I was not in touch with, that the structure of this association is being called into question. Maybe it's seen its life. Maybe something else needs to be put into place. I'm open to that. I do recognize the equity issue. However, I think one basic factor in that equity issue of the speaker had earlier emphasized that something like 80% is being paid by retail office and such, and the residents are, less than a half of a fraction of something. Those shuttles are running on city streets. Those shuttles are running through traffic signals. Those shuttles, when problems arise in public safety, are being addressed by the Emeryville Police Force. The Watergate community has been here for 40 years. We've been paying taxes into the city through all of those years. The shuttle has been in existence 10, 15 years, less than half. So it seems like there is a bigger issue here. I don't propose to be able to address it or to come up with any resolution to it, but I do concur with my neighbors that the shuttle is essential. It's an integral part to any community. We're becoming more and more dense. I listened to the presentation on the newest proposal. We're increasing. We, the residents who have been here the longest, are absorbing all of the impact of that district. Please take care of us. Don't penalize us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Joe Lutz, Emeryville resident. Can you hear me okay?
A little bit higher, Joe. Yeah.
A little higher?
It's a bad setup.
Okay. And pardon me for reading because I have a lot to say. After a lot of reading and listening, it is apparent to me that Gray Bone is not operating with the best interests of the residents or the city in mind. The contradictory and disingenuous statements about the stop removals, the lack of community outreach, and a lack of financial planning has led to distrust and complete lack of confidence by the community. The TMA Board has yet to exert its oversight responsibilities to remedy these deficiencies. We are waiting. When I was appointed to the Planning Commission in the early 90s, the city was struggling to deal with the mass exodus of heavy industry that refused to clean up the toxic mess left behind, the extent of which was so great that the city won a Nobel Peace Prize for the cleanup process. Because of this low-density, development was not feasible in most areas, as the remediation and assembly costs were in the millions and tens of millions of dollars in some cases. As we began rebuilding the city, we were required to go through an extensive and painstakingly detailed EIR process, which was monitored by several regulatory agencies and extensively scrutinized and challenged legally. My fellow commissioners and I spent dozens and in some cases hundreds of hours on these EIRs trying to get them right. It was very tedious work. Luckily, thanks to Nora and others, the Emery Go Round was born early on in our efforts. It provided substantial mitigations in the area of traffic, parking, and quality of life issues. It became a foundational element of the rebuilding process with a string of EIRs depending on its mitigations. It also provided a sense of city pride, and for me personally, along with city council members and planning commissioners, allowed us to ease the burden of development to our residents. Environmental impact report means exactly that. What impact does the proposed development have on the environment? The environment in this case means the residents and the city infrastructure. Mitigations are for the resident and the city. This is not in question. One can only wonder how much worse traffic would be if residents were forced back into their cars. So when I hear statements from the TMA Board, the management company, and the EPOA implying that the residents of the city are freeloaders, I'm angered and appalled. The Emery Go Round belongs to the residents and the city, not the businesses, not the management company. The PBID is a funding mechanism, not a deed of ownership. If the TMA Board and the management company want to remove two 20-year-old stops which serve paying TMA members and nearby residents, and which add less than a half mile and 5 minutes to a route, while recently extending a route to include the Berkeley Bowl, the city must step in to ensure EIR mitigations are not undermined. They must also create and enforce remedies to agreements that leave the residents out. Otherwise, the community will take action. One more thing. Additionally, if the stops are removed, the TMA members who have enjoyed unprecedented goodwill and the support of the residents for so long in the planning process will no longer be able to rely on that support. They can instead expect strong opposition in the commission and city council hearings and at the ballot box.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Jerry Fishman, Watergate. For that lady who wants to take a picture of somebody in a walker at BART, here I am. And she has my permission to show it any time, any place. I've lived at Watergate now for over 25 years. When I first moved there, Emery Go Round was I don't even think it was a conception at all. I don't think anybody knew anything about it. But I was a young buck then, and I was driving, and I didn't need it. But since then, I was told by a friend of mine to stop driving. And I thought, well, okay, maybe it's a good idea. I've reached a point where maybe I should quit driving. My friends thought I should quit driving, and I think the public at large would agree with them. And with the Emery Go Round, I thought, well, perfect. I'd just go out to the corner and, get the bus, and I'm home free. Well, it's impossible for me now to walk down to the towers. I tried it, and I mean, one time I nearly fell, and I don't think that's a good idea. I don't want to have to call 911. Anyway, what I'm asking is that we make the stops on Powell Street permanent, and in addition, put the stop in at Admiral, which was in the original contract when they decided to reconfigure the streets. But, reconfigure the sidewalks and all that. It was there, and I got it on my computer. If anybody wants it, just let me know, and I'll forward the item to you. So please, let's get the stop back at Admiral, or not back at there, but let's get one there at Admiral. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry.
Betsy Cooley, resident, and I keep rewriting this, so this might be a little disjointed. But we'd had discussions recently about what was said at the last TMA board meeting about closing the stops at Watergate, whether it was just for the because of the problems with the construction or if there were other reasons. And so I actually spent 3 hours listening to the recording that Ken Bukowski had posted. It was a 2-hour meeting and going back and forth. And they actually did say that they were proposing to close the stops and that the U-turn issue was just accelerating the decision. The U-turn issue wasn't causing the decision to close it, it was just speeding it up. So the Emery Go Round has, and I also want to say that the PBID, what's frustrating to me about that, I totally understand, I've done a lot of reading about it since I started hearing about what the problem was with, it needs to serve the businesses and not the community, but what's frustrating is that the businesses asked to use the PBID for a funding mechanism, and now they're turning around and saying, oh, because the PBID says it's to serve the businesses, we can't necessarily, go out of our way to, serve the residents. And so the Emery Go Round has established a clear precedent of providing transportation to residents in Emeryville for almost 20 years, and it's become the de facto public transit system for the entire city. If the TMA succeeds in their proposal to close the bus stops at Watergate, the retail businesses will be providing free transit for customers who come from out of town, while at the same time closing bus stops of customers who live in Emeryville. And we very much, and then I also, which I guess I will read, I wasn't going to, and then to add insult to injury at the last meeting, they voted to pay consultants to design routes that optimize service to the businesses, which will no doubt be at the expense of the residents, because that was the reason they said they probably were not going to be able to continue serving Watergate, because it is mostly residents and it isn't businesses that, although there are 2 businesses there that are paying into it. So it's been a great service. We very much appreciated having the Emery Go Round, and I'm asking you to help save our bus stops and keep the Emery Go Round coming to Watergate. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy.
Hi, Lauren Westreich, business owner, and I addressed the council when they presented the findings from the last study, and I just wanted to mention a couple of things. I know that you're hearing a lot about Watergate, but I want to talk about the Emery Go Round in a bigger way. I think that there's a couple of issues, and the funding mechanism is obviously crucial. The levy structure, I think, needs to be expanded and sort of drilled down so that whether it's a PBID or an assessment district, because I'm not sure politically it makes a lot of sense to do a property tax, but whatever, that to be able to drill down and, there's a difference between an industrial warehouse use versus an office commercial use versus a retail use, and perhaps even an education use with having some big education users in the area. So, and then also and I think that the TMA has been, but to continue to be thoughtful about the routes, and I think having an east-west and a north-south route through the city makes sense, and going down to Watergate would accomplish the east-west. And to be thoughtful about the times and the frequencies, which again I think they have been, and maybe the different sizes of buses and whatever. It would be great if our neighbors in Oakland would be willing to consider contributing in the way that our neighbors to the north have, so that we could go to the West Oakland BART. But I don't think Emeryville should be funding the entire EBOT system, and I think there is an issue that has been made abundantly clear, that the PBID system does fall on its knees if it is a general benefit to the entire city. So, a couple of people have sort of forced your hand in terms of, addressing the funding mechanism, but I think the Emery Go Round is a wonderful benefit, and as a business owner, I have no problem contributing to the Emery Go Round. I think it is definitely worth it for the city, but I also think it's appropriate to, like I said, really look at that structure and how the fees are assessed, and also to consider things like, Andy's suggestion for an assessment district. And finally, maybe it is possible to have a hybrid funding mechanism where you could have, a PBID or assessment district, and then also an incremental component that could be like a sales tax. I think if you consider trying to do a parcel tax, you run the risk of everybody wanting a bus stop in front of their house, which would, kill the thing too. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Sam Fushi. I live at Watergate on Admiral Drive. And for a number of years, I was on the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee in Emeryville. I was also on the Climate Change Committee that developed the climate change plan for Emeryville that this Fair Council adopted. And I just want to say that in both of those experiences and others I've had in Emeryville, a huge part of what we've all tried to do in Emeryville is try to create a more transit-friendly city, a city that didn't rely on automobiles, partly because just for our own survival, but also because it's the right thing to do. And so Emeryville Go Round is such a major part of us being a transit-friendly city, and it needs to serve all the city, Watergate included. So I'm sure we can work out how to pay for that, but that needs to be, I think, our sort of overarching vision, as it has been for a long time in Emeryville. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, Mayor Asher and council members, and congratulations on your first meeting. Bob Cantor, I'm the president and CEO of the Emeryville Chamber of Commerce. I've been designated by the chamber to give you a position. I will leave you a written statement at the conclusion of my remarks. I'm not going to read it, but I'll just comment on it and answer a few questions. I want to first of all thank Karen for that very thorough background report. I also want to thank Jeff Sears, who's the chair of the TMA Board. I am also on the TMA Board. I'm the Chamber's representative. I've been on for years now. I've been the vice chair and held other offices. Jeff hit on one key point, which has been thoroughly discussed. Under the PBID law, and I will not get into the details of that one bit, Mr. Biddle can do that for you if you want to report, but the concept of it is extremely simple. And this is not just my opinion or Jeff Sears' opinion. This has been state law for over 100 years. When certain properties are assessed a certain amount of money, those properties in exchange get the service. If the properties aren't assessed, they don't get the service. That's what the law says. That's what we're facing. Having said that, the system, as you all know, is open to everybody anyway who can get themselves to a stop. No one's ID'd. No one's questioned where they live or work. You can be a foreigner visiting here on business in a hotel, not even a resident of the United States. If you can get yourself to a stop, you can ride the service and it's free. The service is free and open to everybody right now, as long as you can get yourself to one of the stops. As the service has been immensely successful and supported by our businesses and everyone, and as a model nationally, naturally everybody wants it. That's natural, of course they do. The question is, how do you expand it citywide and pay for it? Or, to quote a former elected official in the city of Oakland who's no longer there, everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. So how do you get this? How do you get the service? We have two recommendations. One is, if you want to make it a real community service, this is a small enough town, the community needs to buy into it. Some kind of funding mechanism, I'm not going to suggest what that is. If you really want it, then everybody needs to step up with some kind of contribution. We can discuss what that some kind means. If that is not economically nor politically feasible, because that would require an election, we would then recommend that the city look at some kind of contribution under contract to the TMA to expand the service citywide. I would point out that in addition to the PBID assessments, which is paid for over 90%, by the way, by the commercial and business community. All those other services that someone has cited, the streets, the police, the traffic lights, the money for that, over at least 70%, separately from the PBIT assessments, comes from your business community anyway. So the business community pays a lot more to support the funds than just from the PBIT assessment. That's our position. That's the official position. I will leave in a written copy with Karen so she can distribute it with you. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Eugene Sway. I am an architect and city planner. I'm an international professor, author of 7 books on the subject of ecology, architecture, and city planning. And I've been a Emeryville resident since 1990. And I've raised 3 children who also are, 2 of which are residents here, and my mother is also a resident. And I've just come back from China, and I was told about this whole situation. I teach in China. I teach graduate students there about city planning and ecology and architecture. And it seems to me that the situation is quite simple. That if you want to seek more funds, we pay quite a significant amount of tax to the city. So why not, as city administrators, simply decide to take a few dollars from those funds and pay for the funds needed to keep the bus running to Watergate. Also, the Watergate, the bus system is a very much needed system, I think, in Watergate. According to the Watergate Association, there are 2,700 residents in Watergate, 2,700, and there are 1,249 units paying taxes to the city of Emeryville. So it seems to me that there's more than enough funds to do whatever you need to keep the buses running. And by the way, I just learned of the turnaround difficulties, and that, to me, coming from a city planning and architecture standpoint, is an oversight on whoever is responsible for designing the sidewalk system. But bar that, it seems to me that the funding is already there from the Watergate residents, and I'm sure that they would gladly decide or give you permission to use a few dollars from their already annual taxes, property taxes, which are significant, and that the route to Watergate being 1/3 of your population, it seems absurd that route would ever be considered not to be discontinued and not usable. So it seems to me, as citizens of I think a innovative city in the Bay Area, that this problem could be remedied very simply. So from a professional standpoint, I'd like to give my opinion about that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
This is my first time I ever came up here.
Welcome.
Only to look at that on my doorway, this notice. I've been living here for 25 years in Watergate. I used 4 times Emery Go Round, maybe 3 times, maybe 5 times. I have 3 children, never went to school here. They went to Berkeley, not high, but Catholic schools. I've used maybe 1 time police because my daughter mistakenly called, who was 2 years old, 911. I never used fire department, ever. And if you cut it off, it's fine with me, but it's not good for the people who really use those. That's right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Katrina. I'm a much younger resident of Watergate. I've lived at Watergate for 1.5 years. And I must say that although I'm not as affected as my fellow residents, but I do see them on weekends driving past, waiting for the bus. My favorite memory is I was there on Saturday because I didn't want to pay $2 for Bay Street, and I see an elderly couple holding hands walking to the Watergate Market bus stop and just sitting waiting for the bus because they're just gonna spend the day at Bay Street. And so I decided to come here tonight to represent everyone that couldn't be here because they can't drive or whatnot. But my mother's an example of someone that uses Emery Go Round who doesn't live here. She lives in Fremont. She comes to visit me. She doesn't drive very well on the freeway because she's like 70 years old. And she takes the bus, goes to my apartment, hangs out with me, and then she stops by Trader Joe's to go back home to Fremont. So it's very useful for her, and it's great when she comes to visit me because I can't always go down to see her since I'm working up here. And as an ex-bus driver, I know that turn sucks. It's not undoable, but it just sucks. And as everyone voiced here before, it's kind of rude to have the stops taken away from us without prior notice. So it's very informative with everything with the budgets. I understand that, but please be conscious to your residents as well. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jesse Cruz. I'm a Watergate resident, and I just wanted to say that I've used the Emery Go Round service extensively. I used to be a graduate student at Berkeley and used it every day, and honestly, that was part of the reason I chose to purchase a piece of property at Watergate was because of the access to public transportation. It's why I've chosen to remain there and purchase a second piece of property at Watergate, and one concern of mine is the fact that if public transportation is removed, that's going to lower the property value of every unit in Watergate, which is a large portion of Emeryville, number one. And then number two, after listening to some of the discussion tonight, I would be extremely uncomfortable if there was any portion of public funding to the Emery Go Round service if it did not continue to service Watergate. If I understand that I'm not a business that pays into the system, I get that, and I'm happy to do something to pay into that system because I'd like to have it available. But if the service will not be available, then I definitely do not want to pay into the system. So I just wanted to voice that concern as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to speak? Any other members of the public? Go ahead, come forward, please. Yeah.
I am Catherine Holcomb. I live at 3 Admiral, and in the past have used it when I commuted to downtown Oakland to work, and now I use it to commute to BART to take a Kaiser shuttle. And I think a number of people who actually go to the Oakland Kaiser who live at Watergate may be doing the same thing. Mm-hmm. My mother used it to come out here. My brother uses it to come out here. And as I age, it was my lifesaver, because when I no longer can drive, that is my only transportation. Now, when I first bought my my condo here, AC Transit came out. And you started the Emery Go Round, and they don't come out anymore. We have to have bus service. I doubt if AC Transit is going to want to come out, because I think they had to go clear out to the big turnaround at the end of the park to turn their big buses around. So I sat through, learned a great deal from your presentation, and know much more background now about what's happening. But we need bus service on this peninsula. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to come speak? Okay, well then we can
close the public comment.
Yeah, we'll close the public comment for now, and we can hear from council.
Well, I'm
happy to go first.
Yes, go ahead, Jennifer, please.
First of all, thank you. Thank you for sharing your stories, your opinions, your point of view. It's essential and it's important, and I'm glad that we could hear from so many of you. And those who just came and listened and didn't speak, your presence is also important. I have several thoughts about this, and I value public transportation. I think it's what's going to save us from the cars that we like so much and that are so convenient. And in a 1.2 square mile town with 10,000 people now and 16,000 people within the next 20 years, it's really important that we do everything we can to make sure that public transportation is a viable and reliable option. I want to thank the folks who brought us the Emery Go Round. Nora was on the council then, and I want to thank the folks who have been running it for all these years without us being up in arms and feeling an affront. It's actually, it shows the value of it, that people are so passionate about it. So even though they're not very popular folks this evening with people, I think it's important what they have contributed as well. I first want to ask our staff to just address the turnaround issue, because although it's been raised as the reason that the ETMA decided to stop serving Watergate, folks from the ETMA were present in the discussions about the construction of the sidewalks, and I've heard from others that it's the change in operator that really made that change, and I would like to have that clarified, because I don't want to think that we did in the Emery Go Round by putting in sidewalks. I mean, sidewalks should not be competing with public transportation, folks, right? We kind of would like to have both. So if the staff could just briefly address that and clarify. Maurice?
Sure, I'll attempt to do that. Prior to the sidewalks, the buses were a little bit smaller, and some of them could make the U-turn without having to do a three-point turn. When they purchased the larger buses, if they were to make that turn, they would actually have to turn into Admiral Drive in order to make the U-turn.
Which they did?
That's what they were doing all along. The new sidewalk is only 2 feet further into the street than, or the cars are parked 2 feet further out into the street than they were before. But the new sidewalk has the bulb out. So with the bulb out, it's a little bit more difficult to turn into Admiral Drive to make the U-turn. And in fact, the operators of the Emery Go Round buses don't like that move, because it puts the bus in the alignment of the crosswalk. So if the buses were to have made the U-turn the way they want to do it right now, they couldn't have made it before the buses, before the sidewalk was put in. The radius is too large to do so. So in order to do so, even if we didn't build a sidewalk, if they were to do the U-turn the way they want to do it now, you would have to widen the street on the south side of the street.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it. So what I hear is that we also have an organization, an association that is making the decisions around our public transportation, and AC Transit has an elected board, but we are vulnerable as a community to having influence over the decisions that are made, and I think that's been made really clear as well. So I see a need to expand and not reduce service in town. I know that we have the EBOT study that's going on, but I don't think that alone Emery Go Round or AC Transit or EBOTS is going to address all of the needs for Emeryville's public transportation. And I also think that this is not really a problem that needs to be solved only by our city. I think actually this is a regional issue, and I think that the fact that I live on Doyle Street in the kind of between the small family homes and light industrial kind of area, and Emery Go Round doesn't serve my part of town actually well at all. And so I find other ways. I take AC Transit, I ride my bike, I drive my car, but Emery Go Round for me, for my part of town, is a way to get out of the town, a way to get to MacArthur BART. And for people coming into town, I feel like, MacArthur BART is obviously the key portal there. For Watergate, what I hear, it's very different. It's connecting you to Emeryville. And the services and the shopping areas and jobs, and that's very different perspective than from where I live in town. So I really appreciate actually being able to hear that from you. And I think that's somewhat unique. And I think it's important to recognize again how difficult our connectivity is. Powell is just a nightmare in terms of walking and biking. It's not pleasant, and that's why Emery Go Round is so vital, I think. So I would like to direct the staff to find new revenue and to look at several different options for that. I'm not interested in the sales tax. I think that a sales tax is regressive. Yes, it's people who are coming to shop in our towns. We also shop in our town. And it's, for people who have less disposable income, sales tax has a much bigger hit on them. So in my political philosophy, I don't like sales tax as a way to solve this. I hear from Eugene actually about the idea of the general fund just contributing, and I think that's something to look at. Initially, when I hear that, we're very protective of our general fund. We lost $30 million of redevelopment money every year just last year, so we're kind of wary about touching our general fund for many reasons. 54% goes towards police and fire, and even if you're not using it, you want to know that it's there. So that's a real issue for us, and we have other services. We have our great senior center, and we have our child development center and other things and our parks that we want to maintain. So general fund is very special, but I'm willing to actually consider how we might want to include that. At first I said absolutely not, don't touch our general fund, but I think that could be a possibility. But I really want staff to look at regional funding. The state of California has a mandate with SB 375 to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, to have TDM strategies in place. We have to have our climate action plan succeed. And there is cap and trade funding, which will hopefully not be borrowed again next year and be used towards these kinds of things. Well, MTC, which is our regional entity, holds the purse strings. ACTC, which is our county entity, also has very defined projects. I think we as a small city need to talk with our regional folks. There's going to be actually $10 billion that the state is looking at how to spend under cap and trade. And so I'm hoping, and that's a long-term plan again, but I think that we really need to look hard at some of the regional funding issues, because if it's West Oakland BART, if it's MacArthur BART, it's not just about Emeryville residents or businesses. And then finally, I really would like to look at parking revenue generation. Most of the private parking in town has to be paid for right now. Bay Street, someone mentioned the now $3 when I was there the other day to park for anything less than 3 hours at Bay Street. And there were lots of cars going in and out at Bay Street parking garage. It was packed. At the hotels, you have to pay for parking. At most of the office buildings, I believe, folks pay for parking. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think we should pay for parking because parking's expensive to build, and we know that cars cost us money in the greater scheme of things, but we're not paying for it. And so cars are subsidized, and I think we need to pay if we're going to drive a car. So parking revenue on the private side and also on the public side, there are parking benefit districts. There are ways to make sure that people who drive end up contributing to things like the Emery Go Round, and I would like to look into that as well. A year or two ago, one of our residents, who I don't know if he's still around, he was here earlier this evening, Stephen Keller, put forth an idea that was very bold about taxing not a percentage of private parking revenues, but taxing per private parking space in town. And I can't remember if it was 14,000 spaces he counted up by satellite. He couldn't look in the private garages because he couldn't see them. But huge potential. At $30 a space per month, he calculated something like $5.6 million per year. That would pay for Emery Go Round. I'm not sure that that's the way we want to go, but I think that's something to look at and look at other funding sources. So in other cities, they have taxes on private parking. Yes, so I would like to look into that. And then the parcel tax and the idea of a different assessment district, I'm not quite sure. I don't understand what that would look like, the BBID and the TBIDs that were mentioned, but I would like staff to come back with more information on that, because I think there may be something we haven't thought of or has not yet come forward. And in closing, I just want to reiterate how impressed I am with all of the ideas that have been put forward, the thoughtful letters, your preparation to speak tonight, your organization, the stickers, the sign. It is a public good. It is something that should be there for everyone, and yet how to pay for it and trying to understand how best to fund it is what is, to me, the issue to work on, not whether it should exist. And finally, I guess to staff, is how can we, if the PBID does continue to exist, that idea of a hybrid or blending of funds, it's not clear to me if you have special benefits and general benefits, how you can actually blend the funding mechanisms, and I'd like to know more about that. Thank you.
Someone else?
I guess I'll take it.
Yeah.
You know, I think what's happened, the Emery Go Round has gotten to be, really a foundation of Emeryville. It's like the sewer system, the streets and the roads. So once, it's something that's going to be our foundation going forward, as it has been our foundation in the past, as far as changing the city of Emeryville, and we all know that it's taken off a lot of cars. So I agree with Jennifer. I think we have to find a means to fund it, and I too am against the sales tax. I think it's the wrong thing to do and the wrong message to send. But I see that there's transportation grants, so I think what we should do is, I don't know what the status is of applying for any grants, but I would say the first thing we should do is apply for as many grants as we possibly can. And I have no problems with parking meters either, because a lot of these areas, you go down Powell Street, and nothing changes during the course of the day. Mm-hmm. The cars are there all day long. And I know on my little street on 62nd Street, I have people that pull in, they park all day long. And then I have neighbors that have 5 and 6.
So that being said, I want to talk some about the regional appeals and approaches that we may be faced with, because we have a problem that is bigger perhaps than what the local resources can address. Alameda County Transportation Commission has different pots of money for programming, for programs, and running shuttles is considered a program. It's not considered a project. And out of that, the money that Emeryville gets just kind of by right, it's a straight allocation, is under local streets and roads. We could use local streets and roads money to fund the go-round, but that means that we don't slurry seal the streets as often, or we don't do other kind of maintenance to that infrastructure. And while the shuttle service has become part of our infrastructure, it still needs good roads to run on. But that would be a choice that council would have if they wanted to have ACTC money pass through the sales tax measure. I'm talking about Measure B. And with the new Measure B, the reauthorization of Measure B failed by 700 votes at the last election, countywide. But that would have doubled the pot of money that we get through local streets and roads. And so when you're growing the pot of money, then you can maybe think about funding new things and not just existing things. So there will be a new Measure B ballot measure on the ballot at 2014, and it is to augment the existing half-cent sales tax to a full penny. And I encourage everybody to look at that very carefully. There is going to be a new category of expenditure in that called Innovation and Technology Fund. It's 1% of all of the sales tax revenue that will be generated. That is, staff has told me that's possible that shuttles could be funded under that 1% of the new pie, should that measure pass. So for Emeryville to think about putting a competing sales tax measure on when we have a county measure that's going to provide so much through so many different modes of transit, as well as infrastructure, road construction, road maintenance. So I think it's just unnecessarily divisive to have two sales tax measures on the same ballot. The last thing I wanted to say is, so would the new measure be, if it passes, we could consider using local streets and roads money. We could apply for that innovation technology grant, although of course that it's going to be competitive. The other source of new money, Jennifer already mentioned, which is the cap and trade money coming from the state. But I don't think that any of those are going to be straight allocations like local streets and roads is. It's all going to be competitively granted.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to think carefully. Now the funding for the Go Round is in jeopardy, and we have to come up with an answer. It's just an indispensable part of the service of the city, and it's an important mitigation measure for the traffic and the congestion.
Nora, do you want to speak?
Yeah. First off, thanks all the Watergate people for coming. You were absolutely outstanding today, and I think you've really demonstrated to the council and the community the importance of this bus service. But I have to say something. When I came over here this evening and I pulled out of Commodore, what should be, I think it was a setup. What should come along Powell Street but an Emery Go Round bus that made a perfect U-turn at Commodore? And I'm thinking to myself, there's a lot of smoke here. I don't know what the reality is.
Yeah, take the camera.
And our city engineer is taking a lot of abuse, I believe, unnecessarily, but that's beside the point. You all have come here because you're looking to have some kind of assurance that you have elected officials that understand the importance of the service to the Watergate community and to the Watergate Peninsula. And I think we've all demonstrated here that we understand the value of the Emery Go Round, but I sense that we have not really addressed the issue of what are you going to do about a permanent stops at Watergate to service approximately 25% of your city. And I think we can't just talk in nebulous terms about, although I'm a big believer in going after outside money, as you all know. We want to go out after outside money. We want to consider things, and it is part of a regional complexity here on transit, but we have to address the issue that we have created what is a very successful, I'm sorry to say, monster, because the success that it's had has really created a dilemma for us. And I think Joyce put her fingers on it. It's moved into the arena of public policy. I am concerned that we can talk about long-range plans of funding the Emery Go Round, but we have a serious problem. The PBID, the Emery Go Round, is under attack from the Emeryville Property Owners Association. We have got to get in a shorter length of time than long-term, some understanding of how we can, when 2016 comes, how we can be assured that the PBID will continue. And one of the speakers had a good idea. I know staff doesn't like to hear this, yet another task force, but I'm reminiscent of the task force on the fire department. It brought in people from the community and with staff and with council members worked in a finite time period. And I'm really talking about the first quarter of 2014, that we gather together, we go over these options and we look at the options that we're going to be forced into either in a 2014 election, and by the way, I agree with my fellow council members, I don't believe a sales tax just in the city of Emeryville is a smart idea. It's just another phony gimmick. That's just an aside. But anyhow, so I would encourage us to think about establishing a task force with a finite timeline, and you've all had wonderful suggestions about what to consider, but I'd like to focus on what Andy Getz said. He said a couple of things, that there are other alternatives to the P-bid. It doesn't just have to be, if you don't benefit, you don't get to ride. So, and he said another thing that's extremely important. He said he would work for it. Mm-hmm. And I believe Andy was very instrumental in seeing that the first P-bid passed. So we've got an offer here. We've got a rough plan to pursue, and thank you, Karen, for the masterful presentation you gave. But let's take an action tonight to establish a task force with a finite time to come back for action items, possibly March or April. That gives us the opportunity, if we're going to do anything in an election, that we go ahead. But let's move on this.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. That was a phenomenal idea, Joyce, and I thank you for putting it forward. And I think we need a constructive way to have that conversation and delve into the details and support.
And we want Andy Getz on that committee. Okay. Believe me.
I think that's really important.
So I would move that we establish a task force to focus on this problem with the timeline of the first 3 months of 2014, with a report coming in April.
I have a couple of things to say. I agree that a task force, could help. What I worry about is that what we're asking staff to investigate right now is a lot of work, and that managing a task force and setting up the meetings adds another layer to that work. So far, what I've seen from staff is they've been very transparent, very communicative with the public, and especially representatives from Watergate. And I just want to make sure that we do come to some kind of short-term resolution quickly, and that I have a menu of choices before me, and I'm not sure that using staff time in order to kind of shape a task force is the best way to get there, because I'm worried too about the P-bid and whether or not it's going to be renewed and what solutions we're going to come up with in the meantime. Now, that said, right, if the rest of council sees value in that, I just think that there could be a potential trade-off there, because we know that committee meetings certainly take up a lot of time. For me, the things that when I'm looking at this that stand out for me are the transportation grants, of course, although that again feels like a more long-range solution. I'm not sure how that's going to kind of stand in the gap in the next couple of years, which is one of the things that I'm worried about, because of course I want to see the service maintained. I want to see the stops restored permanently, and what I really want is a bus to go to West Oakland. It seems to make a lot of sense to me. The sales tax, no, I don't think it's a good idea. Getting into the assessment district, I would have to have a better understanding of what the mechanisms behind that are, because I think one of the things with the P-bid, like Ruth mentioned, you'll see years where they were very much in the black, and that means that the people sitting on that board were taxing themselves enough to meet their expenditures and have something to put aside. If you get to a certain point, right, where the people who are making the decisions decide that they no longer have the stomach, right, to keep up with these escalating costs, then what do you do? right? Especially if these folks are not elected. So if the assessment district mirrors that structure in any way, then I think it's just flawed. I'm not sure how we go forward with that. The supplemental shuttle service, or the supplement that we were talking about, I think I shared Jennifer's concern. I'm not sure if that would in some way compete with the PBID and then threaten to kind of invalidate it if we were doing the same service. So I'd just like to hear more from staff. Parking meter revenue could be something that I would definitely support, but in terms of filling the gap over the next couple of years or in the immediate term, right, I would be willing to listen to a solution that talked about some kind of general fund subsidy, with the understanding that we could not do that long term, right? That what we were doing was working to find a better structure, right, and a better way to continue this well into the future and to expand it, right? Any other, Nora?
Yeah. I'd just like to say, in response to, I realize that we have a staff that is very heavily burdened and works very hard, but on the other hand, I look at the importance of this transit system to this city at this time, and you have to prioritize what really impacts most of your citizens most of the time. And certainly police, fire, and public works have a dramatic impact. But the transit system that's working now, and thanks to the PBID, has been trundling along, providing fantastic service to the people of this city. For me, it's a top priority. It's one of the 4 most important things in the city, because it directly affects every citizen in the city, to say nothing of the workers. And that's why I'd like to really ask the council again to think seriously about a 3-month task force with a clearly defined directions. This is what we want from you. We want options, because you're right, staff has done a lot of work on this, but we have not, except for tonight, and thanks to all you people that turned out, we have not had the input of the community. And I'm not just talking about Watergate stops here, I'm talking about stops all over town. A 3-month task force is not going to be, the base work has been done, but we need to get that infusion, not just from Watergate, but from the rest of the community.
No, I agree with Nora. I think we have a situation here where there's so much buzz that if we don't do something, the buzz is going to continue with their staff, so indirectly it's going to be, why didn't you do this, and what can we do? So I think we're better off fixing the problem. It's a problem that it's going to affects the whole city, so I think it should be priority, so I would go along with that.
I have a question. When would we next discuss the PBID again? When is it coming before me again after we give you direction this evening? Do we have a kind of timeline? Because it might be that at that stage, with a more narrow menu of options, right, that it might feel like the task force might have more structure to work with.
But there may be some groundwork and research that has to happen before.
And maybe I would feel more comfortable with it at that point, but I'm just curious if you have.
Right now, excuse me, right now we were planning on coming back sometime in the first quarter. Once the TMA has also done their route analysis, because I think that will help inform a bit of the conversation, and they'll discuss their budget, I believe, in January, February. So we were planning on taking some of the options that you all have given us some direction on to further explore, do some more research, because we do need to do quite a bit more staff work on this. And then bring all of that back sometime, I would say late February, early March.
Okay. So I guess I would support a task force, Nora. I would maybe like staff to get more research done. I would like to understand what was going on with the route optimization, so that people have some material to work with right now, because what we've told staff is to go out there and kind of do the background work. I think once they have that material to present, then in February or March, that might be a good time to go ahead and put together the task force. But, you know.
Can I voice another?
Yeah.
I see the value of a task force, but I'm concerned about timing, partly because we haven't set next year's meetings, but traditionally we don't have a meeting at the beginning of January. So if we were arranging something, it would be late January, I assume. We need to find out who's interested, et cetera, to really put it together well.
We have to post the
Right.
Yeah, the
so
composition.
my other
and all that.
concern, though, is what is in our control. And I don't want to give the false impression that we can promise a permanent stop at Watergate, because right now the city council can't promise that at all, right? That's not in our control. That is up to the ETMA board. And so under the current the current process, the current mechanism of the PBID, we have very little control. We're looking at the long-term solutions. And I don't want to say that a task force over January, February, March is going to be able to solve those problems. So that's my other concern, that we need more background information that will focus a discussion, but I absolutely support having a task force so we have that kind of input. Right now, the community can come to a transportation committee meeting. We do discuss Emery Go Round every now and then. We could have a special transportation committee meeting in an evening if that's helpful to make sure people can talk more informally than a city council.
I'm confused about the focus of the task force, whether it's to try to examine the operations that the operator is doing, or whether it's just funding or
Well, my intent was to looking at the funding mechanism to start that process. So that was what I was hoping, because that's, throwing out the challenge to Andy Getz. He said he had some ideas, and so my thinking is like, what are the ideas out there? Because business controls this right now. So what are the ideas that they have to fix this issue?
Do you expect that members of the ETMA would be on the task force?
I would think so. But indirectly, you're right about one point, is that we have the Christmas holidays coming up.
Yeah, the holidays.
And so you back out a couple of weeks, and so that is putting a lot of pressure. So
Do we have did you have a motion, Nora?
Well, yeah, I would propose the formation of a task force, and let's see, and have staff bring back the composition, and then post, the names or the application forms, and so on the January 17th meeting, we start that ball rolling with a finite time that they would be able to come back and give a report by April. The time constraints here are very serious.
Yeah.
2016 is right outside the door. Yeah. And this is a we all agree it's a vital service. We don't have to beat that into the ground. But we need not only our very wonderful, competent staff, but we need to hear from the people in the community also, and the business community.
Correct.
So let's start the ball rolling on January 17th when we come back and start the whole process.
I would go along with that.
That's
Because we
the
have to start, yeah, and I'd second the
and a
motion.
second. Roll call on this, please.
New one, sorry.
Okay.
Okay. Councilmember Brinkman.
Aye.
Councilmember Davis.
Aye.
Councilmember West.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Atkin.
We already have 3, so I actually don't think it's the wisest thing to do it at this time with that timing. So, but we already have 3, so.
Yeah, I mean, already having 3, I would have said that I would like to wait, right? Because I think we've just really put a lot on staff's plate
Exactly.
in order to investigate
I have the same reason.
the possibilities, right? And that's my concern.
So can I suggest that I think it may not be January 17, it might be January 21st, our first meeting in 2014, that we consider appointing folks to a task force, which by the end of February, staff will have the information put together, and there will be some just a meeting in February that will, kind of get the task force going. We will have that information. I know it's a lot of pressure on staff, but it's important, and it needs to have a quick timeline if we're looking at putting something on a ballot in 2014, and that's why I don't want to wait.
Okay.
And I think we'll see what staff can accomplish.
Mr. Biddle? Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to confirm with the council that currently what we have is a system that's run by a private operator. And so as we look at trying to provide funding mechanisms for this system, that we are continuing to consider it as a privately run shuttle, because if we are looking at creating a whole public system and a publicly run bus system, we are talking about something much different.
That's right.
And
That's right.
at a much different cost.
Not my intent.
Why would we
So as
sponsor it up?
I just want to confirm with the council that in terms of what we're looking at relative to funding mechanisms, we are looking at those that would continue to run a private system, and that may otherwise constrain some of the options that you have
Right.
in terms of those funding.
Yeah.
That's all.
With that understanding, yeah.
And it's hard because it feels like we're slapping Band-Aids on something that might otherwise have a different way or a more optimal way to provide public transportation. In this region, what do we have, 26 or 27 transit agencies? And surprise, surprise, it's hard to find coordination between them.
Well, I think the PBID mechanism, that setup, still continues to be a very viable way of providing a significant amount of funding for the shuttle. So, that's certainly a big component of what I think the city can look at in terms of going forward. And if there are other mechanisms it wants to look at to help supplement that, be it some of these other funds and that we were talking about, that's something else that we can certainly explore as well.
I would just like to ask staff to look at the other shuttles in the county and how they're funded. San Leandro, the Oakland Broadway are two. Union City has a shuttle, so just look at the other shuttles.
Right. The Air District, for example, provides funding for some of those.
But that only is good for 2 years.
I have one last question. One thing that was raised, I think it was Joe Lutz's comment about the mitigations that were put in place for projects over the years and how Emery Go Round was an essential component of those mitigations in their EIRs. If Emery Go Round were to go away, which I don't want it to happen, but what would happen for a project whose mitigations are the foundation is on having that service in place?
Well, we'd have to look at each individual one on a case-by-case basis. I know, some of the older projects were obligated to provide their own shuttle, such like, I believe it's the East Bay Bridge Shopping Center was required to provide a shopper shuttle on the weekends, if I'm not mistaken. So we'd have to look at each individual project and determine whether what they need to do in order to continue to comply with their mitigation measures. So
we continue to monitor and enforce those measures.
Yeah, we would have to.
Okay.
And I think Karen indicated in her presentation that the council did adopt a policy resolution some years ago, essentially providing that to the extent a project was contributing to the Emery Go Round, that they were otherwise satisfying their obligations under their project approvals.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks
don't
for coming
leave.
this evening.
We're another hour or so. You can stay here with us.
We're almost there.
Yeah, make sure that we stay awake now. Come on.
Is there a city manager's report?
Oh. Okay, so let's get back to item
Happy to talk to you further, but I can't right
6.1.
now.
This is a public hearing.
6.1.